Hey there, it's Landa again. I am working on a cute little summer hat. This is part of my 4-week watercolor class that I've been teaching. It's a beach theme watercolor class. These are all the other little images that we've been making. And today we're gonna paint our sun hat. So if you're doing one of those 100-day challenges where you're either drawing or sketching or a combination of both, this is a great little project to add to your 100-day collection, especially for the summer or before the summer. We're leading right up to it. I'm in Northern California. It's already kind of warm here, so I've got summer on the brain. So these are just some little graphics that I found that are our inspiration for the piece. This is what I'm working on today. So just like my watercolor kits that I create and sell, this is watercolor paper with the outline. And then for my students, I like to give them the paint just like I would with my watercolor kits. So this is the paint that's down below. It's professional watercolor paint. And we're gonna tape this down before we get started so it doesn't go anywhere. And just like my watercolor kits, you're going to use water to activate your paint. And the tip that I give everybody is typically what I like to do is get a drop of paint and put it on each one of those little dots of, not paint, get a drop of water and put it on each one of those dabs of paint before getting started. This is a tiny bit too much. I like to, you've probably seen me use this in the last couple of videos. I like to use Swedish dishcloths because it's a little bit more eco-friendly than just using a paper towel. And what's really neat too, I'm just gonna stop for a minute to show you, is once it's wet, especially if you're doing the glazing process, sometimes you want your brush to keep a little bit of moisture in it without removing all of it. Like sometimes a paper towel will kind of absorb every drop of water in your brush. And when you're doing the glazing method with watercolor, you really don't want that. So that's why I like a Swedish dishcloth. Okay, so that's what that is for. We're gonna keep our cute little image out for now. You can see all my other examples. These are the homeworks that I gave my students. Of course, a beach ball, seashell, our buoy or our lifesaver, and our beautiful flower. So the first thing that I am going to do is, like I said, I wet my brush and my paint, and I'm just going to activate them. I'm going to get them going. I always like to have swatches too, just so I can test the colors of my paint to know the consistency. And that's what we're going to do. So I'm using 3 colors today. I'm using raw sienna, Indian red, and burnt umber to create our hat. So there's really just 3 parts of the hat that we're painting. We're painting the shadow, we're painting the main part of the hat, and we're painting this bow. So the main part of the hat is really just one solid color. So that's really the first step in doing this whole thing. Anything that you paint in watercolor, if there's a large area or a main area that needs to all be the same color, then you want to do that part at the same time. So I'm going to do direct painting with this. I'm going to mix up the color, try to match something similar to that, and then paint it directly on my outline. I'm going to use a little bit of that raw sienna, a dab of the Indian red, and already, look at how close that is. That's a good match. And if you want to warm it up a little bit more, and just make sure that you have enough paint to cover that entire section. So remember, when you are painting something like this that needs to maintain the same color, if you're mixing colors, you want to mix up plenty of that color. Maybe a tiny bit of that brown too. That looks good. All right. And then the other thing before I paint is you want to keep in mind where the shadows are. I'm going to keep the shadows just a little bit to the right-hand side of this hat. So that means that I'm going to lift my brush on the right-hand side. So you're going to see I'm going to paint this top section and from left to right, lifting on the shadowed side. Because I'm pulling that paint. So I'm painting directly. This is a dry surface. And then what I'm going to do, right, see how I'm naturally creating the shadow? Wherever you have that brush lift, it's going to drop paint right into that section. So I'm going to pull the paint a little bit over, dab off any extra. I can lift that highlight in the front of the hat. That's done. Now I'm going to grab a little bit more of that same color for the bottom part of the hat underneath where the bow is or the ribbon. And remember, work left to right. Then I'm going to lift out that highlight in the hat. And And this has a break where the bow is. So work top to bottom so that the darkest edge is at the bottom of the hat rim. There. That looks good. I wash my brush out, dab off the extra water, and lift just a little bit, maybe towards the front of that hat. Oh, it's already drying, so I'm going to re-wet it. So if this happens to you where one end dries before you can add more paint, just wet the entire surface or section so that it has the same moisture level across the surface. Okay, so my space is pretty warm right now, so it's going to dry quickly. Give us just enough time to mix up the shadow color. So the next thing we're going to work on is the shadow on the underside of the hat. So I'm going to take a little bit of my Indian red. I'm just going to add it directly to the color that I was already using because I'm just deepening up that color, and just a touch of burnt umber to make it more of a shadow. And this is direct painting. Again, I'm going to lift where the shadows are, or I'm going to drop more paint in if I need to. So I'm going to paint that section directly. Now don't paint this area unless the last section is totally dry. Mine is borderline. You're going to see it bleed a little bit right there, but that's okay. And I'm dropping more paint into where it needs to be a little bit darker. And you can always drop in paint as long as your surface is wet. I'm going to wash that brush out. It's already drying so differently, so I'm going to just wiggle that out just to make sure it's blending. And if it's too dark down here, you can always lift it just a touch. And to lift your paint, you want to make sure that your brush is damp, but it still has but no paint, and it shouldn't be drippy. You can see like just a few streaks on my finger. Okay, so cute. Look at how quick this is. So now we're gonna mix up our third color, and this is the bow color. And I just wanna point out that when you're making this bow or ribbon on a hat, you wanna make sure that you leave light areas. So this one, maybe this ribbon is a little bit more satiny, so then we would leave some highlights. But no matter what we do, we are gonna create these shadows to show that there's a tie. So that tie would create really dark shadows right where the bow is tied into a knot. So I'm going to grab some burnt umber and just show you how dark that needs to be. So I'm going to start light, but not drippy. This is a lot. See how drippy this is? I wouldn't use that directly. Whenever you're using direct painting, you don't want it to drip, especially in a tiny area, because you can't really control that. I'm adding a little bit of Indian red just to warm that brown up. Now I'm going to paint the first section and drag that paint to the right hand side because that's my shadowed side. Okay. I'm going to leave little tiny areas on my bow. I'm going to skip the ribbon. So I painted the main part of the hat and then this little, whatever you want to call that, the ripple in the bow. I'm going to lift a little paint right here just to lighten it up a little bit. Oops. Now, while this is drying, I'm going to paint this part of the ribbon. So I'm going to grab some of my paint again. Remember, this is just a combination of that burnt umber and Indian red. Make sure you can flow. I'm using a size 6 Princeton Heritage brush. This is nice. You can roll it to a fine point. So if you need help getting like a really tiny line, always roll your brush. I'll show you what that looks like. So, you know, just like this. Okay, so I'm going to paint that section. I'm going to leave a little area in the middle for a highlight. I'm going to drag the paint towards the bottom, and then I'm going to drop in a little bit more towards the top to kind of create that darker area. If you want, you don't even have to leave a streak like this. That makes it look really shiny. If you want it more soft and subtle, then paint the whole thing and then lift that middle. That looks a little bit softer. I'm going to grab more of that paint and just keep painting on the sections. This section's a little bit lighter, so I'm just going to get a little more. And this bow, where it knots, should be darker, like I mentioned before, than the rest of the hat. Another idea is if you're making a summer card, this might be a fun, like you're making one of those kind of collage cards where it's a bunch of different things for the season. So you see a lot of those watercolor pages where it's kind of a compilation of themed objects. So like this would be, you know, maybe your summer compilation. So you have, you know, your beach hat, you have a shell, you have the beach ball, and then maybe it says summer in the middle. Okay. Well, I don't know if that's a bow, but it looks cute. I like it. Kind of a neat little thing. I think I think I have to edit those ends to make it look more ribbon-like. So if you're like me and you're not into that rounded bow end, then just make it come to a point. That's a little bit better. That looks more realistic to me. There we go. And done. The other way made it look like there were a lot of loops in the bow, which is fine. So you can see that as long as the color below what you were just painting is lighter than the top, then you can paint right on top of it. Okay, that's really it. How cute is that hat? So that's it for our beach hat. Like I said, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely subscribe to my channel. I'm gonna have a lot more fun watercolor things for you, so stick around and I'll see you soon.